Elite Capture and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called Elite Capture, and we have a dumbest bill in America from out west that seeks to cancel the Second Amendment. What a surprise, but uses a really creative way of trying to do so. So first up, elite capture is somewhat similar to regulatory capture being the term given to large companies trying to lobby states and the federal government to create regulations that favor them over small companies. In other words, giving and engaging in crony capitalism to try to get you as much favoritism written into federal and state laws as possible so that you become richer and more successful, and the little guy, of course, is run out of business. Not a unique idea in America, and it's very common, by the way. Republicans and Democrats nationwide do engage in this practice. But elite capture, it's the idea of compromising elites and/or elites compromising long-standing institutions so as to make them incredibly woke and scarily enough to make them conform with the wishes of the CCP. So first up, elite capture of education. No better example of elite capture of education than the state of Virginia. And we saw that running up to the 2021 election last year in November in the state of Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin won. But often not spoken about is his lieutenant governor, Winsome Sears, who speaks with David Asman on Fox Business. And Winsome Sears, the sitting lieutenant governor of Virginia, who is black, speaks to David Asman on Fox Business News about the state of affairs in the state of Virginia. Like, what has she found? What has she discovered? What has she learned in her short time or short couple of weeks as lieutenant governor? So first up, we have a series of clips on this, and here is David Asman's question, and we will follow with Winsome Sears' response. Here it is.
You know, that's another reason why I think you all were elected, is because the hypocrisy of those in power just got to be so transparent, not only in terms of education, in terms of crime. You see a lot of people who are defunding the police who have private police escorts themselves in Congress. In terms of the pandemic, you see people who are not obeying the rules that they force other people to obey with regard to masking, et cetera. How much of that has had to do with your win as well? And how much of that has to do with turning America around from the woke culture?
So imagine, once again, podcast listeners, you have what is a blue state, Virginia. It was taken over by the progressives in the Democrat Party ever since Terry McAuliffe won as governor of Virginia. Then you had Ralph Northam, who took over after that. And they were so confident in their policies of destroying the state of Virginia that they put in place these crazy policies in public education, as you've heard about many times. The difference is now Virginia has a black lieutenant governor. Her name is Winsome Sears. You heard David Asman's question, and here is her response. Here it is.
Well, there is a real awakening happening, and it's happening in the immigrant community. It's happening in the black community. Latinos, especially, you see, are really seeking to really embrace the Republican ideals, the conservative ideals, because you can see what's happening, for example, in Florida with school choice. The charter schools going gangbusters. It's working there. People want choice. And we're going to have that in Virginia. That's what the people voted for. We didn't hide what we stood for, not the governor, not myself, not Jason Miyares, our attorney general. And by the way, we won the House back. There is something in that to say we want change, we want things differently. I got to tell you, I went to a school, a middle school, in a very poor neighborhood. It's in a black neighborhood. And the school is beautiful, but the principal tells me that the children were 2 years behind in their reading grade, and COVID hit, and because they stayed home, they're another 2 years behind. That's 4 years. What are we going to do? So the issue isn't that you have a problem with me being a black Republican. The problem is our children are not learning. I don't know what about that they're not getting. You, politician, you have the opportunity to send your child to whatever school you want because you have the means to do so. And by the way, the wealthy, they already have that choice. So it's not as if we're taking money away. What we're saying is, don't stand in the way of parents who have begged me as I was on the campaign trail. Why can't we send our children to whatever school we want? That's what we're talking about. The future of the child.
So that's Winsome Sears, Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, speaking with David Asman on Fox Business and talking about how important it is in the minority community, Hispanics and Blacks in particular, to have school choice. And that there's a real awakening that is occurring in those neighborhoods and in those communities. And that awakening is, wait a minute, my schools are awful. My kids aren't learning. They're literally 4 years behind. They were 2 years behind in public education because the system is not serving their needs. And then we had, of course, COVID. Now they are 4 years behind, 4 years behind in learning. And meanwhile, I've got the elites in public education and elite capture of public education, elite capture of the politicians, at least up until last November. And the elite capture of those politicians and of public education has resulted in those individuals saying, well, it doesn't affect me. You're going to continue to go to those bad schools because we're Democrats and naturally you're Black and you're Hispanic and you're going to just vote for us no matter what we do to you. But do our kids go to those really crappy schools in those neighborhoods? Of course not. The elite capture public officials, they send their kids, of course, to private schools, always to private schools. And that is elite capture of public education that is occurring nationwide. The difference is that when you have Winsome Sears speaking about this and going into those communities and saying, well, wait a minute, I'm an immigrant and I went into the military and now I'm lieutenant governor. Please, the difference is with me, education. That's what got me where I am. And we need to have school choice, which we've spoken about many times in this podcast, I know. So David Asman also asks Winsome Sears about this whole effect of Governor Ralph Northam's canceling the police and its impact on these neighborhoods. And the awakening that's occurring in Virginia is also occurring about this whole cancel the police movement. We have that clip, and here it is.
That you were trying to address. I know one of the 11 executive orders that the governor came out with had to do with dismissing the parole board and replacing them. Was that because they were too woke?
You know, I don't even know where to begin with this because, once again, coming back to that school, sometimes the children have to walk over dead bodies, I'm told, in order to get to school. You hear gunfire all the time. One of the children, when I was talking with them, he looked so forlorn. And I just said to him, to the class, what gives you joy in the morning? And you know what he said? He's a sixth grader. He said that I live to see another day.
Oh, my goodness.
My God.
Wow.
What is this child experiencing? That's what a child would say in a war zone.
Yeah. That's
what a 70-year-old might say after having lived, not a 6-year-old. So we've got to clean up these neighborhoods. And by the way, when the criminals are let free, they go right back into that community. And is it any wonder then that the people who live in those communities are afraid? They're afraid to talk to the police because, you know, there is a saying on the street, snitches get stitches. And people want to be safe. And so the crime continues. And we have woke people letting the criminals out. You know, the criminals aren't going to those folks' neighborhoods. No, because they have security systems, or they live in gated communities, or they're just pretty safe neighborhoods. You know, help the people who you claim to help and to love more than anybody else.
So you have elite capture of public education, and now you have elite capture in Virginia of public safety. And that was all done under Ralph Northam, which is pretty interesting when you think about it, because The previous governor, Ralph Northam, was either in a KKK outfit at some party in college, and there's a picture of it, or he was in a blackface outfit in college and had apparently engaged in blackface a number of times throughout his adult life at parties, because apparently when you're a Democrat, especially in Virginia, that's a thing. So you have public elite capture of public education, elite capture of public safety. And then you heard there Winsome Sears saying, the policies of canceling the police under Ralph Northam, the guy who clearly makes fun of people who are minorities because of the way he dresses at parties and did so as an adult while in college and who knows when else, also decided to make those same communities less safe. And there's an awakening in those communities that the Democrat Party in Virginia is no longer serving them. And as podcast listeners, here is the thing. There is a golden opportunity for the Republican Party in Virginia to transform itself into a modern party that is for not just school choice, which helps, of course, the least among us, but also is for public safety and community policing and making those same communities safer. And to the extent that that happens, there will indeed be a significant realignment in the state of Virginia from African Americans and Hispanics who will then become Republicans, and they will then have something concrete to be able to actually attach their vision to. Namely, well, the reason I'm a Republican is because my child was going to that really crummy school in the community that I live, because that's the only place that I can afford to live, and that's the public school, and I'm forced to send my kid there. But instead, the money follows the kid, and I can now send my child to a boarding school or to a small private school or to a Catholic school or to a Protestant school or to whatever school that they want to. As long as, obviously the school has to be accredited. I mean, we understand that. But it doesn't miss the point. The fact that when you have someone like a Winsome Sears, who's lieutenant governor, who's speaking to this issue and is seeing movement in those communities because of the disastrous policies of the Democrat Party at the national level and the disastrous policies of the Democrat Party at the state and local level. And then they look and say, wait a minute, we have a black Republican lieutenant governor who just is kind of like a no-nonsense speaker, kind of like, your mom who yells at you and tells you that you did something wrong and you take it very seriously. That obviously that uniquely comes out of someone who is served in the military, because they have a tendency when they come out of the military, especially elected officials, when they once served in the military, they become elected officials sometimes. But one thing is certain. In all cases, they tend to be very straightforward and to the point, because that's what they were always used to. And that is definitely Winsome Sears. And that's elite capture of education. But podcast listeners, we also have elite capture of the old media, and now an attempt to have elite capture of the new media. So Joe Rogan unloaded on CNN recently and said, quote, "They disseminate propaganda and their coverage is preposterous." Popular podcast host Joe Rogan unloaded on left-wing news channel CNN during a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience with guest James Lindsay, the founder of New Discourses. CNN has plummeted in the ratings, Rogan said, because their coverage has become preposterous and the network disseminates propaganda with smugness. Quote, "They have to know they destroyed their business," Rogan said to Lindsay. "The thing about 90% drop in the ratings last year, they want to say it's because of scandals." The podcast host continued, noting of 2 CNN producers who were either charged or are being investigated for sex crimes related to minors. However, Rogan said that's not the reason for the CNN ratings decline. Most people, he said, don't know that, though most aren't aware of it, he said, it's just that their programming sucks. This is what Rogan said. It's that it's preposterous. It's also the smugness in which they disseminate their propaganda, Rogan continued. People know that they're all full of crap, although he said the, S word. And they're doing it with a smugness, and it turns people off. It would turn people off even if they were accurate. CNN's coverage also demonstrates an extreme lack of understanding of human nature, he argued. The host noted that CNN has discussed shaming people for not following COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. What are you effing saying? Rogan said. You're on the news and you're talking about shaming people, Rogan asserted. And so that was reported in a number of outlets, including the Daily Wire. And here is the point, podcast listeners. Joe Rogan is not a conservative. Joe Rogan has tended to be much more on the left of center without question, except that now I think he's just a guy asking questions, right? That's always what his podcast is about. He brings guests on and he asks questions. And the interesting thing about asking questions and using the Socratic method to ask questions is that that's how you get to the truth. You ask questions, and in so doing, you seek the truth, and somehow you come to a greater truth. Well, that is really a great summary of what Joe Rogan's podcast is about. Well, apparently, since the truth is not trending left, and the truth on Joe Rogan's podcast is trending right, the left is now trying to cancel Joe Rogan. And they want to get elite capture of the new media. So there's Joe Rogan. He's making fun of and ridiculing old media, which has elite capture, CNN. And now the elites want to capture new media. That's Joe Rogan. Remember, Joe Rogan's program has more listeners. Okay, has more listeners than all of CNN's programs combined. So take CNN's 24-hour cycle, add up all of their listeners, and Rogan has more listeners of his one podcast on a daily basis. So naturally, it was fine when he was trending left, but now that he's trending right, and that seems to be where a lot of his questions are taking him and taking his audience, they want to cancel him. The elites want to cancel him, and they want to capture his audience somehow and have regulatory capture as well as elite capture of his audience. So in the New York Post, Joe Rogan apologized after Spotify backlash over COVID episodes. Joe Rogan has apologized and pledged more balance on his controversial podcast after a rush of rock legends quit Spotify and accused him of spreading COVID-19 misinformation. Just like the CCP, right? That is misinformation. You cannot do misinformation. I know that sounded a lot more like a Nazi, but I can't do the whole Chinese thing because I'm pretty sure that I'd be considered a racist if I did that. So, quote, if I pissed you off, I'm sorry, the outspoken Joe Rogan UFC commentator said in a nearly 10-minute video on Instagram late Sunday. Quote, I'm not trying to promote misinformation. I'm not trying to be controversial, he insisted on his record-breaking podcast that feels like some out-of-control juggernaut that I barely have control of. I've never tried to do anything with this podcast other than just talk to people and have interesting conversations, he said of the Joe Rogan Experience, which started off as just a messing around with my friends kind of podcast, except Rogan used the F word, effing around podcast with my friends, which is true, by the way, podcast listeners. So Rogan is saying, hey, look, I started the podcast because it was a way for my friends and I to get together and have conversations. And then one day I noticed the podcast was taking hold. We were having a lot of listeners and a lot of viewers. And I realized, you know what? Let's try to get people from all walks of life onto the podcast and have conversations. Literally, that is all the Joe Rogan podcast is in terms of content. Bring the people on that that are sometimes interesting, sometimes not, and having a conversation with them and having the conversation take them wherever it takes them. Well, that apparently is making the left crazy only because his audience is so massive. So continuing in the New York Post article, the podcaster addressed the protest over his work that started with Rockin' in the Free World singer Young quitting Spotify, followed by Joni Mitchell and Niles Lofgren. So you have Joni Mitchell saying, well, I'm going to cancel my music from Spotify because Spotify has Joe Rogan, and I don't like Joe Rogan. So even though he says some things I don't like, just some things, I'm going to cancel my music on that platform. And Neil Young, of course, who has great music, by the way. I must say they both have great music, but they're both really stupid. Needless to say, just because someone has great music doesn't mean that they're the brightest bulbs. And, or it's possible they started out incredibly bright, but having been dazed and confused for so many years, from 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and now in the 21st century, their mind's a little fried and they're really not able to have a real understanding of what's going on in the universe. Quote, I'm very sorry that they feel that way. I most certainly don't want that. I'm a Neil Young fan. I've always been a Neil Young fan, Rogan said. And definitely no hard feelings towards Joni Mitchell. I love her too, he said, praising Chuck E's In Love. The song Chuck E's In Love. Realizing later that it was actually by Ricky Lee Jones. I was going to say, I didn't think Chuck E's In Love was sung by her, whose name he misspelled in his caption. Well, that was kind of, maybe he did that on purpose to try to make fun of her. Rogan addressed an announcement hours earlier by Spotify's CEO, Daniel Elk, that future COVID podcasts on the service would carry content advisories. So remember, podcast listeners, Spotify, which by the way is a very hot stock for all the obvious reasons, because it's considered cool and trendy and so forth, and it is a good service, I might add. Spotify is paying Rogan $100 million to be on their podcast. And Rogan, of course, is someone that they can't just cancel because that is way too much money to cancel a contract and have to buy him out of his contract. So Spotify, as you might imagine, doesn't want these individuals like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young. They don't want that to snowball to many other artists, and artists say, just take my music off there. Too bad, because you won't cancel Joe Rogan. So Spotify's CEO naturally had to come forward. So in the Daily Wire, Spotify takes new action in response to left-wing outrage over Joe Rogan. This is the report. Spotify announced on Sunday that it is publishing its content policy and that it will create a coronavirus information hub, which the Wall Street Journal reported came in response to a backlash that the company has faced from leftists over top podcast host Joe Rogan. So it sure sounds like, just from that first paragraph, that Spotify is going to pull a Facebook, right? Put anything up on Facebook, including a Babylon Bee article. And Facebook, the 15-year-old fact checkers at Facebook are like, oh no, that's not nice. They're making fun of our president. Oh, you can't do that in a free society. That's not allowed. I'm going to put a warning label on there. Well, apparently Spotify is going to do the same thing. The announcement from Spotify's CEO came after musician Neil Young complained about claims that Rogan had made on the Joe Rogan Experience about the pandemic and had his music removed from the platform. A couple of other musicians also had their music pulled down over the issue. Quote, we have had rules in place for many years, but admittedly, we haven't been transparent about the policies that guide our content more broadly. Well, this is of course from the CEO, right? Well, the reason he's saying that naturally is because in a free society, Why should you even have to have a policy? It's a free society with free speech. So again, here's the CEO. We have had rules in place for many years, but admittedly, we haven't been transparent about the policies that guide our content more broadly. This, in turn, led to questions around their application to serious issues, including COVID-19. CEO Daniel Ek wrote on Sunday. I guess he's the CEO of Spotify. Based on the feedback over the last several weeks, it's become clear to me that we have an obligation to do more to provide balance and access to widely accepted information from the medical and scientific communities guiding us through this unprecedented time. These issues are incredibly complex. Ek highlighted the following moves that Spotify will take. Emphasis on the original parts of this. Today, we are publishing our long-standing platform rules. We are adding a content advisory to any podcast episode that includes a discussion about COVID-19. This advisory will direct listeners to our dedicated COVID-19 hub. We will also begin testing ways to highlight our platform rules in our creator and publisher tools to raise awareness around what's acceptable and help creators understand their accountability. So, podcast listeners, let's read this again, and you tell me why this is problematic. So, the CEO says, we will also begin testing ways to highlight our platform rules in our creator and publisher tools to raise awareness around what's acceptable and help creators understand their accountability. So you now have the CEO of Spotify, who literally created a great product for everybody. It's a great product. And that product is now going to be censored. So Joe Rogan, the guy who wants to just have conversations and engage in free living and free speech in the 21st century, now is not going to be able to be as free because there are constantly going to be warnings put up. Well, this podcast might be inflammatory. This podcast might contain content that you find objectionable. This podcast may contain content about COVID-19, and you better look at the following CDC website to make sure you know what the truth is, because after all, Fauci is science. Just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And what I find fascinating is, and I know we have Democrats who listen to this podcast, don't you find anything wrong, Democrats? In modern America, where you're trying to censor what people say, why do you fear what people say? Why are you so afraid? You don't like what Joe Rogan says? Turn it off. You don't have to listen. Turn the channel. It's Spotify, after all. Go back and listen to Neil Young, right? Get dazed and confused with the burned out Neil Young. Go for it. Listen to Joni Mitchell, who looks like she's about 150 years old, although she probably doesn't even know it. But listen to them. Don't listen to Joe Rogan. That's what you get to do in a free society. You don't have to listen through the whole podcast and go, I'm so annoyed. I'm so upset. I'm so triggered. Just turn it. And for some reason, the left-wingers, the folks that are out there, the progressives, don't believe in free speech in modern America. It is the strangest thing. It's so weird. And what's more is CNN's Jim Acosta agrees with a guest that comparing the GOP to not supporting gun control is like a human sacrifice. I just have to read this because it kind of goes along with all of this elite capture of old media, CNN, and new media. Now the elites are trying to capture the Joe Rogan show and Spotify. CNN's Jim Acosta agreed on Sunday with a liberal guest who compared Republicans not passing gun control measures to mass human sacrifice practiced by ancient societies. So, podcast listeners, it's not the fact that Democrat mayors are canceling the police and Democrat prosecutors who were sponsored by the far left progressives and George Soros are not prosecuting crimes. Oh, no, that's not what it is. It's the legal, law-abiding gun owners. They're the problem. I mean, what's wrong with you people? Don't you understand that? Of course, I'm being sarcastic here, but don't you understand that it's the good guys with the gun that are causing all the gun violence? Literally, that is what these people think. I mean, it's just the most ridiculous thing. So you have elite capture of old media, which has happened for at least 20 years. And it's gotten worse, of course, over time. And you have elite capture attempts now at new media. And here's the takeaway from this podcast, listeners. How will Joe Rogan really ultimately respond when it comes to how he conducts himself on his podcast? Will he respond by having more milquetoast guests that are acceptable to the left? Or will he respond by continuing to have controversial guests and just continue to have conversations, no matter who the guest is, no matter where they stand on the political spectrum? The whole problem is that we have to understand that as a free society, people get to say whatever they want to, and then we get to we get to change the channel, we get to turn the channel, we get to cancel subscriptions if that's what we really want to do. But as a conservative, I want to tell the podcast listeners this. I like listening to people on the other side of the aisle. I enjoy it. I actually turn CNN on and MSNBC on ABC, NBC, CBS. I listen to podcasts that I don't agree with. And the reason I do that is because I don't fear information. I don't fear having my beliefs challenged. And yet there is this finality on the left that the only truth is, and the truth that never changes, is the truth that they have, and there cannot be other kinds of opinions whatsoever. And so the elites are trying to capture the new media. But there's also the elite capture of the NBA. So podcast listeners, the NBA, this is in the Gateway Pundit, the NBA interrupts at pregame to play a statement by the Chinese ambassador at the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C. The National Basketball Association subjected an audience, this is about a week and a half ago, at a game between the Washington Wizards and the Los Angeles Clippers to a speech by Chinese ambassador America Qin Gang. I guess that's how you say it. So it's Qin Gang, G-A-N-G, just so you know. Capital One Arena broadcast a pre-recorded speech by Quinn to the audience on Tuesday, which is a week and a half ago, on the occasion of the Lunar New Year, which the NBA referred to as Chinese New Year, despite it being a celebration observed throughout Asia. That also featured Chinese dance troupes, a performance of the Star-Spangled Banner on a Chinese traditional instrument, and other activities honoring Chinese culture. The Chinese government official appearance that was billed as an apolitical sporting event. Wow. What? So the official Chinese government appearance at what was billed as an apolitical sporting event follows years of efforts by both the NBA and the Communist Party to strengthen ties, resulting in the NBA profiting to the tune of billions of dollars. The NBA partnership with Chinese mega streamer Tencent ensures that Chinese fans can watch government-censored versions of the competition in the U.S. The league's eagerness to cooperate with government-friendly Chinese partners has elevated the profiles of individuals such as Alibaba founder and billionaire Joseph Tsai, owner of the Brooklyn Nets, who has used this platform to promote his authoritarian pro-Beijing opinions in the league. So here you have elite capture of the NBA, right? You have these elites who run the NBA, okay? NBA commissioner, the owners of the NBA teams, the players themselves, and they make millions of dollars, if not billions, from the Chinese market. The players make millions from the Chinese market, but also the owners make billions, and the NBA makes billions from the Chinese market. And they take a game, right? A game in Washington, D.C., of all places, and they have the Chinese ambassador speaking pre-game. This is supposed to be look, sports, it's the one place you can go where it ought to be non-political. And yet, the NBA, in their ultimate ass-kissing strategy of China, decides that, well, we've got to make sure that we kiss up to them because it's all about the Benjamins. It's all about that money that we get from China, and that's really all that matters. It doesn't matter who they imprison. It doesn't matter that there isn't free speech there. It doesn't even matter to the NBA elites that China, while it may broadcast American games in China, they completely and utterly engage in censorship of those games. So they make sure that naturally they completely cut out any negative talk about China or any commercials or anything that would make the United States look like it is a truly free society. And people in China might have a light bulb going off going, oh, well, wait a minute, that looks like a pretty good place to live. Well, of course, you guys can certainly understand the Chinese are going to make sure that that is not shown. And so you also have elite capture of the Olympics, of course. So in the Daily Caller, Nikki Haley and James Reich slam China, warn Olympic athletes of authoritarian actions. So former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, and Republican Idaho Senator James Rich congratulated Olympic athletes while warning them about China in an open letter published Monday. The highly anticipated 2022 Winter Olympics is being held in Beijing, China, despite concerns about China's censorship, human rights abuses, and more. Haley and Rich propped up this year's U.S. Olympics athletes, calling the recognition one of the world's greatest honors, but the two also highlighted the high risk and potentially dangerous political environment. Quote, no one will have the rights they're accustomed to, Haley and Rich warned, pointing out that Chinese Olympian Peng Shuai was silenced and just disappeared in November of 2021. Haley and Reich also highlighted China's ongoing genocide against Uyghurs and slammed the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, for its unwillingness to put human rights ahead of lucrative relationships with Beijing. The IOC faced widespread criticism after one of its members declared Peng to be fine. I think Peng is that tennis player. And one of the Chinese officials said, well, she's not around anymore, but you don't have to worry about her. She's just fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, sure. I mean, folks, this is the danger of elite capture, okay? Because you have capture by the Chinese government of the NBA elites, and they're trying to co-opt sports, but they're also trying to co-opt who? Elected officials like Joe Biden, like Hunter Biden. Just reported, in fact, in the New York Post, J.P. Morgan Chase was subpoenaed in 2019 over Hunter Biden's business deals in China. A grand jury subpoena was issued 17 months before the 2020 election for Hunter Biden's bank transactions involving the Bank of China, a corruption watchdog has found, raising concerns that damaging material about the then candidate Joe Biden was hidden from voters, you think? The order sent by Department of Justice to J.P. Morgan Chase Bank asked for the records of any international financial transaction for the past 5 years involving Hunter Biden, his uncle, James Biden as well, and former business partners Devon Archer and Eric Schwerin, according to federal documents. The anti-corruption nonprofit Marco Polo Foundation, founded by former Trump administration Garrett Ziegler, obtained the filing which targets the financial ties between the four men and the Bank of China. So there's obviously a lot of information out there, and podcast listeners, no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, you ought to really want to know this information, because the last thing we want is elite capture of the president of the United States and elite capture of elected officials throughout the country and at the federal level, like congressmen and senators. That's the last thing we want. But that's exactly what the Chinese want. Because if they can gain elite capture, then we will cease to be a free society. And that is exactly how they can infiltrate the United States of America. There's no better way, in fact, for them to infiltrate the United States of America than to engage in elite capture of the family members of the President of the United States, and then also the President himself, because once you have foreign monies go into your account and you don't report that stuff, and you're engaged in really corrupt deals where you make millions and millions of dollars for really literally doing nothing, then obviously you would never be elected president of the United States if that information was actually put out there in the media. But the media has elite capture too, the old media. And as we said earlier, the new media is trying to be captured by the elite, such as YouTube trying to make sure that they can just kick you off, and other platforms like Facebook and Google trying to kick you off by advertising on Google if you don't say the right things. And so the Chinese, in my opinion, the CCP, has infiltrated not just big tech, but it is infiltrated at the highest levels of government. And I know what you're going to say out there, especially the folks on the left. Oh, Mark, you're just being like a complete conspiracy theorist. Really then? Really? So why don't we together, podcast listeners on the left, join the people on the right and say, we need to see what's in all those documents that were subpoenaed from JP Morgan Chase. We should all want to see that. We should all want to know who's getting wealthy at the federal level simply because of the fact that they hold a title or they have a relative or a father who is a high-level government official. And you know what? Chinese are smart. Elite capture works. It's been working for them for a long time. The difference now is that we're beginning to call them out on it. And the difference now is that we now have new media resources to go to, right? It's not just YouTube and Facebook. We actually have other places like Rumble. And what is the new service that Trump has started? Say again? Getter, yeah. G-T-T-R? G-E-T-T-R, Getter, which, by the way, podcast listeners, we are now on. And Getter is a new service that is not going to be canceled by the left. It's actually similar to Twitter, but much better. And also Rumble, of course. Granted, it has a long way to go, I will admit. YouTube is clearly a better platform in terms of its technical aspects. But here's the thing. You're not going to get canceled from Rumble. And so elite capture is something that all of us should be concerned about, because it is happening at all levels in business. It's happening at many different levels at government, not just governors of the 50 states in some cases, not all, but also at the federal level. And we have to, podcast listeners, push back on this, because the American experience of free speech, right? The right to say what you want ought never be taken away. And the Chinese, the CCP, okay, not the Chinese people, but the CCP would love nothing more than to cancel the First Amendment. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is. Dum 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 dum. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is charging an annual fee to own a gun. You heard that correctly. Charging an annual fee every year to own a gun. A Silicon Valley city, San Jose, has just voted to institute the first in the nation gun ownership requirements. And this is in CNN, so this will be fun to read from CNN. The San Jose, California City Council By the way, podcast listeners, San Jose is right outside of San Francisco. It's part of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Voted Tuesday night to adopt a first-in-the-nation ordinance requiring gun owners to pay a fee and carry liability insurance. Measures aimed at reducing the risk of gun harm. That's right. If you pay a fee on your gun every year and you buy liability insurance, it's going to reduce the risk of gun harm, according to San Jose, California, because it incentivizes safer behavior and easing taxpayers by the financial burden of gun violence. This is CNN, of course, loving this. You know, they're writing this and literally making it up as they go along because they have no statistics to actually go to. But charging an annual fee to own a gun in San Jose, they're quite serious. Here's ABC 23 News reporting. It's ABC 23 News reporting. It's the greater San Francisco, of course, news, ABC news outlet, reporting on the annual fee and insurance to own a gun. Here's the clip.
Following hours of debate, the San Jose City Council passed gun mandates that some legal experts say are the first of its kind. The mandates will soon require gun owners in San Jose to carry liability insurance and pay a yearly fee. Now, the insurance is meant to cover losses or damages by negligent or accidental use of a firearm. The annual harm reduction fee is meant to be collected by a nonprofit for firearm safety education and other services. Several gun rights groups, including the Gun Owners of California, have threatened to sue over it.
We are concerned about victims of gun violence, but we are not to blame. This law, in essence, assigns blame to lawful gun owners. There will be a lawsuit filed asking for an injunction that will prevent this from going into effect, and then ultimately having the ordinance declared unconstitutional and overturned.
The nonprofit recipient of this fee has not yet been named. As of now, there's no set date for when this mandate might go into effect.
So that was ABC 23 News reporting in the greater San Francisco area about the San Jose bill to charge an annual fee to own a gun, as well as requiring that you have liability insurance to own a gun in San Jose, California. But as you heard, they want an annual harm reduction fee. That's what they're calling the fee. It's an annual harm reduction fee. So let me get this straight. You're a legal gun owner, and as a legal gun owner, you have to pay an annual harm reduction fee. Because, you know, you're the good guy with a gun, and you got to pay a fee because it's an annual harm to own a gun. It's just ridiculous. So that was ABC News reporting. Here's NBC Bay Area reporting, because they're interviewing the San Jose mayor, okay? Here's the guy that signed this and intends to sign this bill into law. It's an ordinance, but it's a law, same thing, right? And this San Jose mayor is being interviewed, and you're going to love how stupid this guy is. Just reading the talking points, you know, off of his teleprompter. We have that clip. We have a series of them, actually. Here's the first. Here it is.
You first told me you were working on this legislation the day of the mass shooting at the VTA rail yard. Nothing can bring those victims back, but talk about how this addresses the financial impact of gun violence on the community.
Well, with regard to the financial impact, we know that's certainly the least of our concerns with regard to gun violence. But what we have done through this legislation, what we hope to do, if this passes on Tuesday, is to create a nonprofit that will be funded with fees from gun owners that will be entirely focused on initiatives that reduce gun violence in our community. And the best way to do that is by focusing on family members who live in households where a gun is owned. We know that's where the risk of homicide, and particularly the risk of suicide, is many times greater than for other residents. And so focusing on mental health services, on suicide prevention, on domestic violence prevention, on treatment for addictions and gun safety classes. These are all of the kinds of initiatives that can be funded through this initiative and reduce violence in our community.
So, podcast listeners, this is the mayor of San Jose talking about an annual fee and insurance for every single gun owner, literally saying that, the gun guys, the guys who are legal gun owners, they're going to be the ones responsible for reducing crime, because if we make them pay, they're going to be a lot less likely, I presume, to use their guns. But that kind of misses the point, because they are the legal owners of guns. What about stealing up to $950 worth of stuff in San Francisco and you don't get prosecuted? So you can walk into a Walgreens, you can walk into a jeweler, you can walk into any store in Oakland, California. You can steal a bunch of stuff up to $950 and not get prosecuted. Okay, so do they have to pay an annual fee for the right to go and, steal everything when they go inside of a store? Of course not. Not in San Jose. Let's just cancel the police. And then you have bedlam going on. And then let's get rid of all the legal gun owners, because they're the bad guys. So you're going to love this. The NBC Bay Area reporter asks San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, same guy you just heard, Sam Liccardo, that mayor of San Jose, what about the insurance provision of this bill? You have to have your gun insured. And it's not insured because someone steals it, necessarily. It's insured for when you use it. Because its whole purpose is to make the gun uninsurable so they can get rid of the Second Amendment. Listen to this guy. He literally reads the talking points and then says, well, can we redo this? Can we redo this interview? Because it's not exactly what I wanted to say, because I'm a robot. We have that clip, and here it is.
Now, because there is that insurance premium issue, you say that this incentivizes responsible gun ownership, because folks can lower their premiums for doing things, like you said, using gun safes and trigger locks. But the counter argument is that responsible gun owners aren't really the problem here.
Yeah, insurance, we've seen, has been very, very effective in helping us to save millions of lives out on our roads, because drivers obviously get good driver discounts, but they also are incentivized through adjusted premiums that they can get savings through. Chris, I'm sorry, could I try this again? It's gotten a little long-winded.
Chris, can I try at this answer again? Because, all of my talking points that my staff gave me, the liberal talking points, the progressive talking points that really make no sense whatsoever, and the fact that I'm trying to gut the Constitution of the United States, all of those talking points, I somehow messed up. So can we push the redo button so I can redo it again? And she lets them. But she kept the recording there, which is really good, which is why we're able to play it for you. So here's the answer he meant to give you. We have that clip, and here it is.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll ask you the
Is
question
that all right
again.
if I just try this one more time?
Yeah, do you want me to ask you the question again?
Okay, yeah, thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
So you say that this incentivizes responsible gun ownership because gun owners can lower their premiums for doing things like using gun safes or trigger locks. But the counter argument is always that responsible gun owners aren't the problem.
Yeah, we certainly have seen how insurance has been very effective in the context of saving lives out on the road. And the data shows that we've reduced deaths per mile by 80% because of what auto insurance does to help incentivize the use of devices, ABS brakes, for example, airbags, and to encourage better driving. We know there's a lot of well-intended people out there in this country who own guns, but may not be taking all the precautions. For example, 4.6 million children in this country live in a home where a gun is kept unlocked and loaded. So it's not simply a question of being law-abiding. It's a question of ensuring that everybody is well-informed and has the right incentives, and with a little nagging from an insurance company, is doing the right thing.
I wonder if this idiot mayor, Sam Liccardo of San Jose, I'm wondering if he actually thinks that illegal owners of guns, right, the bad guys with the guns who, of course, would never buy insurance for their guns, they're not going to follow any law whatsoever. I wonder if he actually thinks that that's going to work, right? Now that all the bad people are going to register their guns and they're going to buy insurance and pay an annual fee, we'll be all fine, no problem whatsoever. And it kind of misses the point, because he doesn't want to get the illegal guns off the street. He wants to get all guns out of people's houses from the law-abiding. It's precisely why he's requiring insurance. And by the way, There is no such policy now in the United States of America because this bill is the first bill of its kind in the nation, charging an annual fee to own a gun in San Jose and requiring insurance for your gun. So it's requiring both simultaneously. And so there's no such insurance product that exists. What insurance company why would they want to get involved in this anyway, right? Well, they're not going to because it's blatantly unconstitutional what this guy is up to. And he couldn't even get his answer right because he didn't memorize it properly or he couldn't read the teleprompter in the Zoom interview. But it's just so typical of the left. Cancel the police, create bedlam in your community, have just massive amounts of gangs killing people as well as stealing things from stores. Don't prosecute them. Don't put them in prison. Then they keep repeating. Then go after the good people who actually own the guns and take the guns away from them so that they can no longer defend themselves, their families, and their property. Just unbelievably stupid, ladies and gentlemen. And this is why the conservatives, okay, this is why the conservatives are going to sweep these elections because of idiots like Mayor Sam Liccardo, who wants to charge an annual fee and require insurance to own a gun in San Jose, California. And that's the dumbest bill in America. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, Getter, and our website. See you next time.